boom goes the dynamite. No, boom go the restrictions keeping you from improving at CSGO. Boomeo is a service which not only sponsor my videos and my YouTube channel, but among other things contained within the site and the service is a subscription element where you can go and watch videos from top in-game leaders and top players in CSGO, teaching you how to play CSGO, how to improve, how to use angles, how to play the game. I was actually watching some videos earlier today from Fallen, the in-game leader of SK Gaming, formerly Luminosity, on Overpass, and that's a very tricky map to play. It's one that even a lot of top teams haven't figured out, and Fallen's teams, most famously in earlier 2016, one of the best of all time on Overpass, as you would have seen if you'd seen my top 20 most dominant maps article, which I'll link in the description box below, and which Fallen's team was a part of. Now, North America, the NA scene, lacks good in-game leaders, but more than that, it doesn't value in-game leaders. And that's actually the cycle which is causing them to lack in-game leaders. They don't give them enough opportunity. They don't invest in the in-game leaders they have. And on top of that, people don't want to be in-game leaders. So the real issue here is this isn't a video to say that it's all NA's fault and that all of these factors are the NA scene failing. Some of the problems are the NA scene's issues, and some of them aren't. So we'll start with the ones that aren't to get those out of the way. First and foremost, two players who would be fantastic in-game leaders in NA and could do a lot to develop talent and to set up teams properly and have a lot of competitive experience are banned. Dazed and Steel are both banned from CSGO. Now, I notice a lot of people who weren't around in the early days of CSGO equate the two as though they're both, because the thing is, they're both people with a lot of experience. They both know how they want to set their teams up. They both have their own philosophy on playing the game. They both still play the game and still do in-game leading aspects within Rank S and ESEA and PUGs and 10-mans. So people think of them similarly. Now, I want to make a distinction here. Okay, so Steel did in-game leading. I didn't follow the game, but I'm told in CS Source, and he had success in CS Source. But in CSGO, Steel wasn't really an in-game leader. He was doing some after the iBuyPower era when he was making Talked. But in general in CSGO, he was just a player. Dazed, on the other hand, one of the best in-game leaders of all time. I mean, you put together a top 20 all in-game leaders of all time list in CSGO, he's got to be on there. He might even crack top 10. He's a guy who was very individually skilled, but also very good as an in-game leader, had a very defined style. Maybe it wasn't always the best style. Maybe he didn't develop certain players as much, but he really knew how to run a team. So taking two people who would be contenders with the originally better in-game leaders, that's not the fault of the NA scene. Like, it's not their fault that Dazed and Steel took part in what they did, and it's not their fault that they were also unlucky enough to be the ones who got caught when other teams at the time actually did similar things and never were caught and never had that kind of smoking gun damning evidence that led back to them, so they got banned. So that's not the fault of the NA scene, and that takes two names out of the mix that should be there otherwise. Then you've got to look and say it's not the fault of the NA scene that Sean Gare still actively plays, and yet for the last 2 years, actually would it be 2 years? No, it'd be about a year and and however many months we're in now, 3. So a year and 3 months. So 15 months or so. For the last 15 months, Sean Gares hasn't seemed driven to want to be the in-game leader of the best NA team. He's wanted to make his own teams and make them on his terms and with the organizations he's been involved in. And it seems like he's focused more on the career aspect of making money and stabilizing things, going into what he's doing outside in his life. And he doesn't seem like he's the guy who would leave a team and who would go and join Team Liquid and make them the best team, or would go back to Cloud9 and take those talented pieces and take them to the top again. So there's another potential candidate for best NA in-game leader taken out of the mix effectively. He's only going to play on these fringe teams and with either lesser talents or developing talents. And so you don't have a chance for him to be the leader of an Optic and take them to a major win. Then you've got to add in another thing that's not the NA scene's fault, is that they've had some scenarios that were quite unlucky. Like, one is that Gob B was kicked out of Mouse Sports in Europe in 2015. And at the time, he absolutely was a top 10 in-game leader, maybe even a top 5 in-game leader in the world. Really good in-game leader, a lot of experience, worked with a lot of different players, gotten the best out of a lot of players. And he wanted to come to NA because he knew the offers were there, and there weren't many offers in Europe because obviously there weren't international teams to the same degree back then. I mean, actually, there was no phase. They were G2 and they were much better than Mouse at the time. And even before that, as Kingwin, they mainly went for star players. So Godby's only options really were go to lesser teams like a Penta type team, which wouldn't be good for his career, or go and get some money in NA and potentially play for a team that could be good in NA. Now, we all know in the end, he plumped to go and he was part of NRG. And they weren't a good lineup, but part of the reason they weren't a good lineup and part of the reason he was on NRG is because Godby, for whatever reason, didn't want to be a coach, first of all. He wanted to play. Okay. I mean, he's not a good player. He's quite bad in terms of skill in CSGO. Very different than 1.6, by the way. But you know what? Like an MSL, we can put up with that as long as tactics are really good, and they have been at times. So most teams would have put up with that. Teams like a Cloud9, Team Liquid, these people wanted Godby. They wanted to sign him and make him the in-game leader. They wanted him as coach initially, but okay, let's make him the in-game leader then, because remember, coach could be the in-game leader in the game. Well, fuck it, we'll make him in-game leader. The problem was, Godby, for whatever reason, had this stipulation that Legia had to come with him. Legia had to be with him and play with him in the team. And guess what? It's already enough that you've given up some of the fragging to take Godby. No one wanted to take Legia as well and take the two of them and put that much of a limitation on themselves. And you've seen from the teams that they've had since then that they've never been elite level teams. They haven't been anywhere close, really. And so, again, that's really unfortunate for NA. If Godby wanted to just come on his own, I think he could have really turned around the NA scene. He could have really shaken it up and been a fantastic leader. So you can see there, I've named 4 different high-profile names who could be fantastic in-game leaders in NA. And guess what? There's 4 names, right? Well, there is Cloud9 and Optic and Team. I guess Team Liquid's got Stanislaw. Well, let's throw the other ones in there. So you could already have these good players. But, oh, and one last detail I will say as well. Ties into the Godby one a little bit, which is this issue that you can't just pick from EU players, because even if there's EU players who aren't in a top team, unfortunately, most of them will actually take lesser circumstances and less money in Europe to stay in Europe. To them, the condition of getting to live at home, be with your friends and family, only have to travel to events is much more preferable than having to go to America, live in a specific team house without your friends and family, potentially just with your teammates, or not even with your teammates, if your teammates live at home like a lot of the NA players do. And so to them, it's too much of a knockdown. Too many of them won't give that up. They don't want to give up that lifestyle. That's something, by the way, that makes CSGO esports very unique compared to, for example, League of Legends, where everyone's in the team houses. So I can understand why the EU players don't want to do that, but that also is a bit unfortunate for NA, and I don't blame NA in that sense, which is that you'd think, well, dude, we'll offer you twice as much money. We'll give you more streaming opportunities because we've got a bigger brand. These are things that NA can and does and has offered to these EU players, and most of them haven't taken it. That's why it's very rare that you get EU players go over to NA. And in general, they've had to recently start like scraping the barrel and try and find a hidden gem. They're not getting any big name player of any context, not even a guy who's not in a top team right now. Now that we've taken the parts that aren't NA's fault out of the equation, we have to look at the parts that are their fault. So, first and foremost, people don't in general want to be an in-game leader in NA. You see a surprising lack of people who both want to do the role and then dedicate themselves like, that's going to be my career. I'm an in-game leader, that's what I do, and getting into other teams or going up and down in my career is going to be based on how well I in-game lead and how much better I can get at in-game leading. People in general don't want to do it, and there's not that many dedicated in-game leaders, even at the pro level, despite the fact NA has more teams than anyone that are sponsored and have proper amounts of salary and potential to go far and viewership and exposure, and yet they don't have that many good in-game leaders or people who are even dedicated to the role continuously. Now, one area in which this is a fault of the NA scene as a whole, but it's not a fault of some of the players who would be in-game leaders who didn't become them, is if you look at the culture within the NA scene for CSGO, the job security for an in-game leader is fucking terrible. Now, if you're an in-game leader and your team, first of all, odds are you will be bottom fragging. So if you're bottom fragging, some NA teams already will start thinking maybe we should cut you. Even if they're having results or pretty decent results or pretty good, they won't think themselves with, oh, well, you're bottom fragging and we haven't gone far enough. Well, is our star player good enough? Is the hybrid third player good enough? They don't think of that. What they look at is they just go, well, you're not doing well enough. I think we could get someone else in. And you know what? We'll run some temporary strats and he'll take over. This guy says he'll take over as an in-game leader. They'll do that instead. Even worse, if you're a good in-game leader, but your team's losing in NA, they think about cutting you. Go and look in Europe. If a team's losing, they don't cut the in-game leader. The in-game leader usually controls the team, decides who gets into the team, and he's the one who just stays there the whole time. That's why some of those players have been in those teams for years and years. Stars come and go. Young players come and go. Support players sometimes come and go. The in-game leaders stay put. In NA, they get cut. Let's run down some of the in-game leaders in NA, outside of the names I told you before, and you'll see a familiar pattern's going to emerge. So, FNS, leader of the CLG team that in 2015 became pretty decent. Well, okay, so we know he left CLG and went over to eventually TSM. Okay, he was cut from TSM by FNS. Back to CLG you go in obscurity. No one wants to take a chance on FNS. Yet there's all these teams crying, "Where's the in-game leaders? Oh, I don't want to be an in-game leader anymore. Oh, right, it's your turn to be in-game leader this month." No one's trying out FNS. He gets cut from teams. Let's go down. Adren. So, okay, you know that I don't think Adren was a very good player on Team Liquid, and I don't think he was a good enough in-game leader for Team Liquid, but cut from Team Liquid. Now, what opportunities after that? Sure, he might have had some opportunities, but he didn't go and become part of a really good Cloud9 lineup. He didn't go to one Optic and revive them and get these good players and take them to a major. It was one and done for him. And now he plays in fucking ECS Development League, wasting his time with a bunch of streamers. Now, if he wants to do that and be a streamer, fine. For him, that's fine in his life. It's not good for the NA scene, though. I always said about Adren, I actually hope this guy, if he gets cut from Team Liquid, goes to like the fourth best team, the fifth best team in NA, and becomes a leader there and sets up how to run a team, teaches people their roles, develops younger players, gives them the basis that we can see other players shine, and then they can come through to the bigger teams. And he can kind of be one of those guys who mentors people up. That's not how NA uses him. They don't value him enough in that respect. Let's keep going. So Daps, in-game leader of a bunch of teams for the last few years, and he has been cut from practically every one. Not a lot of people know this. He was the in-game leader of the Team Liquid team, with Relevate before that, who he was cut so that Adren could be the in-game leader. And then he's on Optic, and Optic got pretty good. You know what? Not the Optic we're talking about the end of 2016 with Stanislaw. No, before that, they were qualifying for majors. They were getting pretty decent. They were winning maps off people. They were taking close games against people. They could beat NIP on the odd map. They come along, they cut this guy. They kick him out. The guy who's repeatedly shown that he can take that third, fourth, fifth best NA team, set them up, run the team properly, and then it's on the stars to do the rest. It's not his fault that the stars aren't superstar players. Okay, let's keep going. Slemmy. So he had his chance in Cloud9. They cut him and would rather have the most inexperienced player in the team be the in-game leader than work with this guy anymore. And where are all the other teams lining up to get him? All the other teams need in-game leaders. No, you're gone. You go to the bottom of the pile. No one's ever going to hear from you again. Even Stanislaw, the person on paper is the default best NA in-game leader right now from his time in Optic, he was actually initially cut from Optic. Go and have a look at that. When Tarek came into the team, the first thing they did was they cut Stanislaw, and then like a week later or something, they brought him back, and it was instead Daps they swapped out, and Stanislaw came up. So even Stanislaw was going to be cut. And by the way, no one was scrambling for him then. Team Liquid weren't looking to get him as in-game leader then. Cloud9 weren't saying, hey, well, come and join us then if you get cut from that team. He was just out there to drift and go away. And people thought he can only be a support player. Oh, he's not really the right person to be the in-game leader. It's a fact. If you look at the trend in NA, not what they say, the trend of action, that NA teams in general, we're talking about the top NA teams, would rather have no in-game leader or some temporary solution to have an in-game leader than pick up what they think is a less skilled in-game leader in that particular sense. One that doesn't have some mega pedigree. So Team Liquid would rather have Hiko, they'd rather have Nitro try being the in-game leader, rather than take in a Daps, rather than take in FNS, rather than try out a Stan before they got him at this point in time. Cloud9 would rather have nothing, a player totally ill-suited to ever being an in-game leader, just have a few months to just waste away trying to be the in-game leader and give them no T-side at all, rather than recruit some of the people I'm talking about here. Then they go to Stewie. They take their best young talent and labour him with a role that he's still not suited for. He does an okay job of it, in as much as he makes his own game pop off and his automatics. He absolutely fails in every other regard. Now, I don't blame him entirely. No one else is willing to do it. But he's certainly not a good in-game leader. It's not a good long-term solution. It's a temporary solution. And even better, in that case, that's a perfect example of where you should be upgrading. Because you used him, you relied on him, you put the burden, the yoke on his neck. He carried you for a while, got you pretty good. Now you're supposed to use the status he's given you to recruit a Stanislaw, to recruit a Daps, to recruit Sean Gares back. And then you go, you know what, you just go back to be the star players to 2K, and now we've got a legit team. They didn't do that. They stick with the same team. The problem with temporary solutions, and by the way, temporary solutions usually means a player who's not an in-game leader, who's never planned to be an in-game leader, doesn't really want to be an in-game leader, won't dedicate himself to being an in-game leader, but agrees to be, is that they end up being temporary in every case. People like a Nitro, oh, I'll do it. Yeah, You'll do it because initially you think you've got some ideas. Because initially it might work the first week or two. But what happens is when it gets to the point where it's not working that well and your individual game isn't working well either and someone in the team isn't integrated properly, the Shroud, whatever it might be, into the lineup, and then you start losing, now you go, I don't really want to be the in-game leader anymore. This isn't fun. I'm not enjoying it and I'm not succeeding. The difference is a dedicated in-game leader keeps looking for what can be fixed and he keeps finding the other parts and he upgrades his own skills constantly and he doesn't just give up doing it. They put their mind to it and they know that they're an in-game leader. That's what NA lacks, because the problem is the temporary solution will always suck given enough time because they don't commit themselves to it. I mean, funnily enough, this fact that players don't commit themselves to be an in-game leader, first of all, ignores how you get a lot of in-game leaders. There have been many in-game leaders who weren't in-game leaders before. So, okay, Snappy, the in-game leader of Heroic, hot topic right now. He wasn't an in-game leader for many of the years of his career, but he became one because he saw that his team needed it and he just dedicated himself to it. He was going to do that and go off and have success, or he was going to fail like that. MSL was a support player at the beginning of CSGO. He wasn't an in-game leader. There are dozens and dozens of examples of these kind of guys. Stanislaw, again, he was a supportive player. He was just a team player, and now he's the best in-game leader in NA, arguably. So, not only do people not commit themselves to in-game leading, but this is where I see other problems in NA. So I actually think entry fragging is another role that they lack a dedicated players for. And that's because it's the same thing. You have to dedicate yourself to entry fragging. You can't just do it when it works for you and when you've got a good team and when you feel like it for a month and then give it up. So you look at NA, okay, they've got Rush, okay, Elige when he wants to. You got Stewie, and you used to have Freak, but he's not in the scene anymore. So take him away, you got 3 dedicated entry fraggers of note. That's it in the whole scene. So in the same sense, you lack entry fragging because, again, it's a role that sucks. You get killed. People cut you. You don't want to commit to it. And they're undervalued. So another factor that ties into this is that it's not that the talent isn't there and that there aren't people who could be in-game leaders. It's that why would you waste your time doing it when the job security isn't there and when the track record shows you will be cut? If MSL, in-game leader of North, Snappy, in-game leader of Heroic, Gob B, in-game leader of Big, Pronax, and by the way, I'm talking about Gob B without Legia, Pronax, in-game leader of Godsent, and Blade, in-game leader of Flipside. If these players were just NA players, and they had the exact same skill set, I mean, admittedly, they developed that to being in-game leaders, they would never make it to the top. They'd never get into a Cloud9 and Optic. They'd never get into the top 5 teams. They'd be looked at, because all these players I've named at different points in their career have been pretty bad individually or just average individually at best. They wouldn't get into teams. They'd be cut. They'd be removed. They'd get disheartened. They'd say, fuck it. They'd go, okay, I'm going to go and be like a 3rd best player in a lower team then, at least have job security that way. This is what would happen. They wouldn't be the guys being scouted out. Yet look at them now. MSL's in a team that won a 250k or more tournament, one of the best in-game leaders in the world. Snappy's in one of the most dangerous underdog teams of the last year coming into this year and is on the rise to top 10 status. Gob B, still a really good in-game leader. Admittedly, he's got his own issues, as I've mentioned. Still someone who can run a team, though. Pronax, a legend. A guy who actually, in Europe, won 3 majors. Like I'm telling you, he wouldn't have made it in NA. Blade, this is someone where no way he'd make it because he's this old school guy. He plays his old same style. He sets a team up the same way. He's got very strict rules on how the team has to run. People would rebel against this and be like, who the fuck's this guy that told me what to do? He's bottom fragging. He'd never make it. So in NA, people in general, when they start out, when they're getting into the scene, when they're getting noticed, they not only want to be the star, so they're going to try and play that role and play in that aspect, and you're just going to be picking stars, but they only wanted to recruit stars as well. Like, you get these mad NA teams where a star underperforms to some degree, so they go and recruit another star and replace the worst player, but who's the supportive player. No, replace the fucking star. That doesn't make sense. The team has to be balanced in its roles. It makes sense. You get people where it's like, it feels like there's 50 players in NA towards the pro scene who all want to be the number 1 or number 2 option on a team. Well, there aren't enough spots for that, are there, for 50 players? There might be 20 spots like that in the whole region. And even then, if you're in the 9th best team, that's not really that great, is it? Likewise, people don't get coaching when they're at a lower level. Something I've noticed about the American mindset, and this is something as an outsider I've been able to see, is that in American sports, I think a lot of the players actually don't have a very good fundamental understanding of the game, as in how all the pieces fit together and what roles balance off each other. But NA sports have put a lot of money into coaching, and they value coaching at a high premium. And so from high school onwards, you get, assuming you're in a good high school and then a good college and then a good team, you get solid coaching, mentorship, leadership, and someone analyzing your game from when you're a developing teenager to when you're the finished product and you hit the pros. You don't just arrive at the pros and then get a good coach and then you have disconnect with him and he doesn't know how to use you and you've never taken coaching before, you're just a skilled player. That's what the NA scene's like. Now listen, there isn't that coaching in Europe either, but the NA scene, that's a way you could fix it. That's a way you could develop players. That's a way you could find them where they'd figure out, no, I've got a better role for you actually. You're never going to make it, mate, as a shooting guard. You're going to be my small forward here. I want you to focus more on doing this over here. Likewise, they can develop you. They can take your skills to the next level, shore up your weaknesses, develop your strengths, show you how to use your strengths more. I mean, this is another aspect where I can see without the coaching even how you could also fix it, which is you need the veterans to develop players. So rather than have, I mean, I know in the case of Dazed and Steel, you can't do anything because they're banned. But in an ideal world, Dazed, Steel, Adren, Gobby, Sean Gez, if they don't want to be the leader of the top team, what they would be doing instead is they'd be working with younger players. They'd be developing them. I mean, you go and look around the world right now, you're getting these talents developed over the last few years, thanks to veteran leadership. MSL's brought so many talents through the Dignitas and North Doors that have now gone on to bigger things, or even in his own team being very good. Existence in France has taken this LDLC team that were throwaways. They'd even had the best players picked out. Devil, Body. There was nothing there. No one wanted those players. All of a sudden, after Existence has come in and worked with those players and put them in, suddenly XMS started to look pretty good. Now he's in Envious. You go and look in 1.6, famously Threat and Pronax used to always be in the 3rd, 4th and 5th best Swedish teams, and all they did every year was get a new crop of good players, semi-pros, and figure out which ones would make it, turn them into stars and have them plucked away by the top teams. These guys did so much for the top end of the scene, even though they didn't play there most of their careers. God B in mouse sports. You would never know that Nex was a star player if it wasn't for God B. You wouldn't have an idea that Chris J could be a good offline player rather than just some famously online player who never did it at LAN and was super overrated. These are the guys who develop the talent, even if they're not going to use them once they get to the very top. They don't have the same veteran influence in NA. They don't have the same guiding mentorship role. Even some of the vets play as though they're just another player and it's all just jokes and they fuck around with their team and they don't want to take up the responsibility of actually being the guy to develop them. Dazed and Steel, as I said, have good reasons not to. They are banned. They can't be a part of a top team that plays in the major cycle. Sean Gez is in the area, but first of all, he's not trying to be in the best team. And then secondly, just his personality is not really authoritative enough. That's why some of the players in Echo Fox were bombs. That's why Cloud9 kind of fell off towards the end. That's why in Misfits, okay, they're pretty decent at the moment, but are they going to go much further? Who knows? Maybe the players individually can develop, but are they developing as a team? Yeah, they're kind of running as a team. What's going on there, though? He also refuses to get rid of Shazam. Then you've got the others, who I think could do a lot in the scene, aren't respected enough to be picked up. FNS and DAPS, their careers are pretty much done. They're off on the fringes. No one wants to play with them. I'd rather have DAPS and have him run the team and play in his particular way and give him control over what roles people have and how they play than get better players at and then get better players at the other positions as I need to upgrade my team, than have a temporary solution or a guy who can sort of in-game lead but is also going to be like trying to be a good player and therefore we have like not as much depth. I'd rather have DAPS in that sense. The rest of the NA scene disagrees with me. They don't value these people. They cut them. They think they're a joke. So to me, you look at the top NA teams right now, Optic, Cloud9. I mean, Team Liquid in the past before they got Stanislaw. These were examples of teams loaded with skill. They had all the skill they need. They have all the potential to put the very good roles in and then figure out who doesn't fit. They didn't have good in-game leaders, though. These are teams which, as a result, looked way worse because they didn't have a good in-game leader. Now, I want to put this point at the very end here to really make you think this is a thought experiment, but it's based on something that happened. Now, if I ask you all who are NA fans about Optic when they had Stanislaw, you'll all go through all the players and explain to me how they were good players and how they fit their role and how they did a really good job and how they're among the best in NA at their role. Tarek and Mixwell, what a duo of talents. Players who both had big MVP type performances at tournaments. Then you go down the list. Okay, you had Rush, probably the best entry fragger in NA, one of the best entry fraggers in the world. You had Naf. Now, I've never rated him that highly, but people loved the game where he popped off at E-League. He had a month or so where he was playing really well. Hybrid AWPer, pretty decent if you want him to be a third or fourth player, right? Then you had Stanislaw, now considered the best in-game leader in NA, really good support player at times in history, really good fragger for a fifth best player in your team. But you know what the problem with that is? You only know that now because the team won E-League, because the team had a rise in form over the last 5-6 months. Because now that Stanislaw's gone, you've seen what they lack. But here's the point to make about talents and developing them and in-game leaders in NA. If you go back in time to about the early summer, late spring of last year, and you look at Optic then, and this is what the rep was. Mixwell seems like a good talent. The rest of them, not really that good. Like, they can sometimes win on a map, but is that more the style? And is that even a good in-game leader? And Stanislaw, okay, I always thought he was underrated. As a result of him being underrated, a lot of people didn't think he was that good. Thought he was just okay. They didn't have Tarek at the time. Naf, I mean, who even cared about him at that point in time? He'd been in the league for 2 years. They're only now, after they accomplished it, that you can see the value in these players. People didn't see the value in them back then. They weren't getting call-ups from Cloud9 and Team Liquid. Those teams didn't want them. It's only now that they want them, now that those teams and those players have done what they couldn't do. If the NA scene worked correctly, it wouldn't be like that. In EU, you don't get a scenario. It's not like the second or third best team totally overtakes the best team and then the best team comes against their players. No, the best teams identify the people below them and pick them up. And that's why they always remain the best teams and the other teams are stuck within the hierarchy and can't get above them in that particular sense. NA doesn't value in-game leaders.